Tonight, our program is Gary Saxe doing his master's presentation. He's a fantastic photographer, extremely experienced. He's been in our club a long time, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. It's going to be called The Second Shot, a study in composition. And so I've been really looking forward to it. I love the title right off the bat. So anyway, welcome, Gary.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me go to share screen and we'll move right into the program then. And, oh, there we go. Share. And let's see, let's get that off here. There. Give me just a second and I'll be switch to my slideshow. Come on, baby. There you go. Okay. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. The Second Shot, a study in composition. And this is the Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. They're the highest on the North American continent. Really fun place to visit if you're up north of Santa Fe. Hey, take the first shot from the heart. In succeeding shots, adjust exposure, depth of field, and composition. And of course, here we have the Tetons, got up early, beautiful clouds, happened to have a full moon. So that was in there. And I like the shot. The little inlet on the far side kind of leads you into the forest and the lower trees and some framing on either side. Let's move on. Composition and design. In the visual arts, composition means the placement or arrangement of visual elements in works of art. Design is how we chose to arrange those elements to have more impact and to express our vision. This is a copy of a slide from my Mamiya 645 when I had it, and just love Zion, and I thought that's a good entry shot. The stream just kind of leads you right into the mountains, and we have layers. Equipment. Understanding the settings and the modes in the camera and lenses are essential to building blocks in creating different types of photographs. When to use aperture, shutter, program, and manual priority modes in the camera, and learning the effects of aperture and focal length of the lens will help you create better photos. A sturdy tripod, flash, and lens filters are a must in certain situations. And this was just a tabletop shot that I did out of some of my antique cameras. As I go through some of these, I'll explain a little bit about the equipment used in the pictures there. So in this case, it's a base ISO of 100 for best quality picture, f11 for depth of field, and it needed 0.06 seconds on a tripod to get that. I used a studio gray background. Exposure triangle. Aperture versus shutter speed versus ISO. Aperture, amount of light that goes through the lens. Larger opening equals less depth of field, which is distance in focus. Example, f2.8. Small openings, more depth of field. Example, f22. Shutter speed. Length of time the shutter is open, higher for action and handheld. ISO, the sensitivity to light by the sensor. Base ISO for landscapes. This one here, I used the base on that particular camera. 27 was a wide angle. That gave me a lot of depth of field so I could get really close to my son while he was doing these with his skateboard. Of course, it took 1/1600th of a second to stop the action just as he went up to the top and did his grinder. Light. The quality and the amount of light will reveal different elements of an image. The direction, exposure compensation, and the time of day will have an effect on the overall composition. Golden hour occurs in daytime shortly after sunrise and before sunset. It gives warm colors and reduced contrast. Blue hour occurs shortly before sunrise and after sunset. It gives a blue cast to images and is softer light. On the left, that focus point there was on the grasses, and I wanted to get it just as the sun was going down, so it had this nice evening effect. On the right, we probably remember our field trip up to Mono Lake, and this was just a little bit after sunset, beautiful sky. And because of the long exposure, you could see the water from the waves coming in had a nice soft effect to it. And you can see the rocks had a nice soft lighting that filled in nicely. Direction of light can give different qualities to an image. Front lighting, even full lighting, easy to set exposure, reduce texture and shape of image. Okay, in this one, this was my granddaughter, and I shot her wedding. And in this case, we had them lined up nicely there with couples facing tall people back, the shorter in the front. And that was with a flash. And I had the flash straight up with into a reflector, which gave a very nice soft light. Okay. And the backlighting, silhouettes, rim lighting, exposure compensation, emphasize shape and form, and sunsets. So in this case, we had one of our friends, the elephant seal, and it just really nice, but it does take additional exposure to make sure that you get the side facing you exposed properly. Side lighting. The light source is at right angles to the subject. It creates texture, shapes, and form. The contrast gives three-dimensional effect. Fill lighting. Reflected light or flash to partially light dark areas of an image. Okay, you can see our nice little bunny vase. And if you could see it at 100%, which is where I like to view for sharpness, you could see the texture in each one of the silk flowers. The nice thing about this type of lighting is just nice and soft, and you get to see the shape of the vase on that. Notice the tail is filled lighting. On the right, you can see that I had the setup on that still life. I had an umbrella and a flash, remote flash shot into the umbrella, gave that nice soft lighting. And the white card on the left is important, because without the white card, the tail was black, would be hard to bring out. But by bringing a little fill, it brought the light up just enough that I could use the shadow slider to adjust the light to where it looked just right. You probably recognize this place. Diffused overcast lighting gives soft light with no shadows or contrast. It's a flat light with more detail. Okay, and then of course we have our nice little pathway leading up into the forest. I love the big tree with the trails. This was base ISO again, 18 millimeter wide angle for depth of field, f16, ensured that I had that depth of field. Focus point was probably at the base of the tree, the big tree. And let's see, that's f16. And on the tripod, it needed 4 seconds to complete that exposure. Exposure metering and compensation. Multi-mode. Some cameras it's matrix, some it's evaluative. Its metering is multi-segment. It's good for most situations. Use center weighted, 75% center, 25% outside center, for when the center is most important. Spot metering, meters 2 to 4% of the area, good for metering a small portion of the frame in tricky lighting situations. Yeah, and modern cameras, that area can be adjusted. Exposure compensation may be needed for dark or bright scenes or create drama in an image. Check the histogram for overexposure. And this is down in the desert we just took a few weeks ago. 24 is a wide angle with a full frame. F16 ensured my depth of field, and that required 1/125th of a second. On this, we talked about exposure compensation. In desert regions, the white sands like we see here are very light colored and will generally be about one stop over neutral gray. So exposure compensation is necessary when shooting in these bright situations. Let's talk basics. The subject, centering, brightness, contrast, and texture. What's the subject? Through the use of good compositional techniques, we can guide the viewer's eye around the image and to the subject. Look for backgrounds that complement the subject. I chose that about the subject because quite often we'll see the beginning photographers will have the subject small, and they need to ask themselves, what's the subject and how are we going to treat that subject to make it look the way or the story that we want to tell. On the left, you can see that's the first shot, kind of overall shot. But then, I took that shot really quick because, butterflies, they come and go pretty quick. So I zoomed in when he moved to another flower, got in tight, and there we have a nice texture in the top of the flower and in the butterfly, and the eye and the little antennas, they're tack sharp. Centering. Do not center your subject unless you have a specific reason. Putting the subject off center is more dramatic. Brightest object. Our attention goes to the brightest object in an image, but it can also go to the area of highest tonal or color contrast or the most texture. Now, those ideas of contrast and texture are borrowed from artists. We don't hear much about that in photography. My wife, when I first started, she said, "You're centered that picture." And then she said, "Yeah, Mr. Hall, who was our art teacher, said, never center anything." So that's kind of the rule. But once in a while, it can be broken. Now here I did an object, the butterfly is perfectly centered, but it doesn't seem like that. And it's because it is made sure it was the brightest object. It's also the sharpest object, and it has more texture than any other object. So all three of those together really focuses your eye on the butterfly, on the flower. I want to point out too is the stem of the flower. One artist that I read about, he said, if you are going to center something, have something that leads up to the object that's centered. Okay, in this case, we have the stem. So you go around, you hit the stem. It's a diagonal line, leads right up to your texture and sharp picture. And that was at 1/2000th of a second to stop the action. Okay, I need a breath and a slight drink of water here. Okay, leading lines. Leading lines draw the eye around the image and to the subject. Care needs to be taken so they do not lead the eye out of the image. They can be an actual line or an implied line. We look at the image from left to right, just like we read. Use this as a starting point. Pennsylvania Memorial, Gettysburg, probably the most important picture that you'll see today. The reason why is because we have it explains a lot about leading lines. Straight lines can be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. A line not perfectly straight tends to look better. Horizontal lines. The horizon in a seascape or mountain range. Horizontal lines are calm, but also are more static than other lines. They can make dividing lines between parts of a photo, placing something near the end to keep the eye in the image. Vertical lines can be either subject or a leading line. They are a sign of strength and height. They can lead into an image and can also be used for framing element or at the end of a horizontal line. Diagonal lines give the feel of movement or motion. They are less static than horizontal or vertical lines. Joining two diagonal lines can be used to point to another element in the image. A slanting stem of a flower can lead to the beauty of the blossom, which we just discussed. Okay, this is an 18 millimeter for wide angle, f11 for total depth of field. I use a single focus point almost all the time, and it was probably on the front Canon because I knew I had enough depth of field to get everything tack sharp on a tripod, of course. Okay, let's look at the sidewalk in the front. Leads you in a diagonal line. It leads to the steps. The steps are horizontal lines. And as we move up, we will see that we have the arch. On each side of the arch, we have vertical lines. The vertical line on the right leads up to the arch itself, a curving line, which brings you back down on the left vertical line, and you can see the two people in the center. By design, if you looked at this 100%, the two people in the center would be sharper than any other object in the photo. We also notice the vertical lines here between the statues, or framing the two statues on either side. And one further comment is, you can see my cursor probably in here now. If we look at the Canon, or the two Canons, take the Canon on the left and draw a line straight across. Then draw a line to the ball that's on top of this small structure and back to the Canon. We have a triangle shape, and that's what a lot of artists will do. They'll do things like this to give different shapes. Now notice at the top of the structure, we have the top upper left corner. If you drew a line to the statue, drew a line back down to the other corner, across, you would have another triangle. Another comment. If we look at the clouds, the lower clouds, the top of the lower cloud, you can see myself going along. Yes, that's a diagonal line. Above it, you'll see another cloud line, another diagonal line. Okay, converging lines are lines that intersect. Think of a vertical line meeting a horizontal line. They stop a line from going out of the image. Layers can be repeating patterns, like successive mountain ridges, or in a landscape it is thought of as foreground, middle ground, background. They add depth and three-dimensionality to an image. And of course here, we have our nice leading lines, converging lines in the vineyard. But notice how your eye stops when it reaches this tree line. Then if we look at the vineyard, if we want to look at layers, that whole vineyard is one layer, leading you into the next layer, the trees, leading you to the next layer, the mountains, leading you to the sky, the next layer. Interesting on this, because the left of the little valley, we will see that there are several layers in those mountains, brought out by the atmospheric haze. On the right, we'll see another group of mountains in a little vineyard. But if you start counting those, you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers there just in the mountains themselves. So we have lots of layers as an example of what layers can be. Curves. Create a path for the eye to follow. The S-curve is a very strong visual element in any image. Pathways, streams, or fences are examples. They can be abstract too. I love this picture there down at Hearst Castle. Just, all the tiles and the way they're shaped, the design in this, when they designed this, is just really neat. I mean, at first I caught the curves of the stairs coming up. But then I look at the tiles in the front, and we have all kinds of shapes. We have triangles, we have squares, repeating triangles, and the blue tiles seem to point up. And then I did in post make the statue a little bit brighter than everything else in the picture. And it's also framed by the two lights. Okay, so that brings your eye in. And I'm sorry, it is centered, but I thought it worked well enough that I could get away with it. Shapes. The four basic shapes are circles, triangles, squares, and rectangles. The circle creates a feeling of harmony and balance, but can be static. A triangle can add a sense of movement and drama. They tend to be more powerful. Squares and rectangles create a sense of structure and order. Abstract shapes can add a bit of mystery and intrigue to a photograph. Contrasts between shapes create visual interest and draw the viewer's eye. Contrast creates harmony, tension, or movement in your images. I chose this one from our recent field trip because the rocks have a nice natural triangular shape. Thank you, Terry, for pointing that out. And of course, it was taken at 1/2500th of a second to stop the motion of the wave crashing. That was also done on high speed with 10 frames per second. And I chose the frame that had the most action. Fairly wide angle lens. We might also note that the left on the rock, left side of the rock pair, the bright side is also a triangle. And it also has the shaded side as a triangle. And the rock just to the right there is triangular in shape as well. They're framed by two other rounded rocks. So each corner is a little different. Patterns are repeating shapes, layers, or lines. Patterns can be subject or in the background to make the image more interesting. Framing in composition is not the frame on the wall, but is including a visual elements along the edges of the image. Foliage or a tree at the edge of a scenic shot keep the eye on the center of interest. Don't overdo it. Okay, on this one, of course, we can see the palm tree as a framer on the right, framing tree, and the mesquite tree on the lower left. And of course, we have lots of patterns in these transmission towers. Interesting too is that the three palm trees, if you put a line through the foliage, it points to the towers again. And in the towers, I might point this out, if we took these at the base of the top here, it points towards the other tower, which can bring you right back around and in through your photograph. Horizontal or vertical shots. The choice whether to use a vertical or horizontal depends on the subject. Verticals imply height. There is no right way or wrong way. Ask, what are you trying to say in your image? In these two photos, both at Bryce Canyon and the early morning, on the left, of course, we have the horizontal. And it's nice because we have a nice, there's our S path that I didn't show before, going down, bringing you into the picture with the photographers. And we know they're taking pictures of something on the left. So I purposely left more room on the left for them to take pictures of or to get some kind of idea of what they're doing there. The next picture on the vertical is a nice leading path, a couple hikers, but it really shows the height of the features and how and it gives a great sense of scale with the people. And okay, we'll move on to color. In our images is very important. Using color schemes, emotion of color, patterns, contrast, white balance, black and white, and the significance of colors will lead to successful compositions. To learn more about the use of colors, see the Santa Rosa Photographic Society YouTube channel. Herb Gaddis, Master's Presentation, Color Theory and Practice. He did this last fall, did an excellent job. And because of the limited time that we have, I refer you back to there to idea of how we can use color in our photographs. Negative space is a fundamental of good composition. It leads to or defines the subject. It is the blank space in an image. On the left, Joshua Tree is well defined with the negative space of the blue sky. On the right, it's a little more thinking about that because our eye just goes straight to the nice water lily. But look at the water. Think of the water as a negative space, and we're placing the flower and the pads around that negative space. I was inspired to do this when I went to the Monet exhibit in San Francisco, because I looked at and studied and tried to figure out why everybody loved all the lily pads. And of course, it had the little bridge, it had nice framing around, it kept you in there. But why was that so good? And I looked at that and I thought, how did he know how to place those lilies? Then I realized that if I looked at the negative space, that it leaded us through that image. And he basically placed it adjacent to the negative space in such a way that it led you through. And so I was inspired by that. So that's a good way to think of negative space as a way to make your pattern and your design. Okay, this is for Nancy, because she said one time that she wished somebody would do something beyond the rule of thirds. Okay, placing the subject, grid, thirds, diagonal, triangle, center, golden ratio, and golden spiral. These are a few of the options artists use to place the center of interest. And then I'll explain the Lightroom Classic overlays. Okay. Grid. Grid is a nice pattern when doing architectural, or if you want to make sure your horizon lines are straight. Of course, we've all heard about the rule of thirds, where we place the center of interest on one of the crossing lines. In this case, I took the sun and moved it outside that. Remember, don't center anything. That's the rule. So if you use the thirds, it's really great. I use it a lot, but I always move it in or out and around depending on the picture and the story I'm trying to tell. Another way to place is diagonals. In this case, I use the rainbow along one of the diagonal lines. Next one would be center. In this case, I didn't want to be dead center. I wanted to know where exactly my center was so I could place that red 28 on the front of the locomotive just off center to make it more interesting. The triangle. That's one I haven't used before, but I found that my picture of the birds coming down worked well with the triangle. Then you can see the golden ratio to improve your composition. Okay, to help you avoid clutter and create an orderly and balanced design. That's an important sentence right there, the last part of it, is we use placing because it does help you avoid the clutter and it helps you create orderly and balanced design. And that was out of a book by artists, not photographers. So I thought that was really well to put in. The golden ratio. Now let me explain real quick. If we see up here 1 to 1.618, you don't have to remember this, but this is just a subtle explanation. If we look at the upper left-hand corner, think of that as 1, the line next to it. Okay, the distance from that line to the edge of the image is the 1.618. So this area is 1.618 times the distance of this corner. These have been used for ages. Back in the 1500s, our famous photographers brought these up. You know, the Fibonacci spiral is a golden spiral, and other famous photographers from the 1500s and on used the golden ratio, used widely by artists too. One artist said, I use the golden spiral. They never talked about the rule of thirds in art school. Well, there's a quote, something to think about. The golden ratio here I've managed to place on the left image, the running motor. And you can see the gears running next to it. I wanted to show sharp texture on this. And you can see on the golden ratio, I've placed the spinning wheel, the brightest part of the picture, near that junction where it meets, which is just a little bit near the thirds if you look at it. The golden spiral is based on the golden ratio. If you would like to learn more about the golden spiral, I highly suggest that you either go to Google or Bing, and there's a lot said about it. It shows how they've come up with the golden spiral. But remember, if you use this, it's loose. I see the golden spiral in artwork, and they explain it, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, you know, the subject is close to that center, but it's not near it, and the rest of the line, you know, what's that all about? Well, I chose on this bridge shot, and there again, I made that person on the bridge much sharper than anything else in the image. And it's near the center of the circle. And then that circle brings you around the bright spot and down. It actually mimics along the jetty up at Fort Bragg. Now, I said something about Lightroom overlays. Okay, if you're curious about where to find these overlays, if you go into Lightroom Classic, the upper left-hand corner, we can see the File, Edit, Develop, Photo Settings, and Tools. We want to rest on Tools and come down and check Crop. If we go down a ways, we want to select Crop Guide Overlay. Then it will show you each one of the overlays that we've just talked about. I didn't include the fifths for lack of space, and the aspect ratios can be used when, say, an 8x10 or a 5x7 print is desired. And the important thing here is it's kind of hard to remember to go up here, but a little memory for you is if you're going through these, you can just touch the letter O while you're in the crop mode in Lightroom. You touch the letter O, it will bring you to the next grid overlay or the next overlay. Touch it again, it goes to the next one. It'll rotate around the overlays that I just talked about just by pressing O. Now, go around and stop on golden spiral. Take your finger off the O. I want you to press the Shift key down and hold it. Then press the letter O. You'll find this spiral will be placed in different spaces throughout the image. So if you have something on the lower left corner, upper right corner, lower right corner, you can simply go to the golden spiral, press down and hold the Shift, press O, and you can come back and find that. And then that'll assist you in cropping to make better use of the golden ratio or the golden spiral. Tie it together. Okay, this one might be nice for a little, 3.5 index card to write down. And just as a reminder, you're out in the field sometimes. Tie it together. Ideas on designing your image with composition. Point of view. Move around the subject. Depth, use layers or perspective. For scale, include a person or recognizable object. Fill the frame to get rid of distractions or simplify the image. I didn't say much about simplifying, but that's something in art and in photography that a lot of people neglect, is simplification. Include environment to tell a story or give a sense of place. Horizon line, placement can give a sense of expanse when given to the foreground or sky. Balance happens when positive and negative are nearly equal. Try to have the negative space lead into the positive space. Action. Give moving objects room to move into. If the subject is looking towards something, give extra space in that direction. Suggestions. Vary the corners. Watch the edges and background of the image so they do not distract from your subject. Groups. Using odd numbers are more interesting, 1, 3, and 5. I even saw that there was a rule of odds, which is 1, 3, 5. I got that initially from learning about bonsai plants. The Japanese always make their bonsai plants with an odd number of limbs on them. Self-assignments. Okay, use self-assignments to reinforce what you have learned. Self-assignments is probably one of the more important concepts that we want to work with. You want to call it a concept, simply because that's how you learn as a photographer. And all really good photographers use self-assignments to learn and explore maybe a portion of photography that they would like to further understand. In this case, the picture over here, we've got my grandson and great-grandson Ace, great-granddaughter Sophie. Ace, I got him pointing towards some starfish, but it explains right here what everything we've talked about. I moved around to get them in the right position and moved them around so that I could have Sophie staring at her brother. A depth, there are lots of layers in this, going down this flowing water down through the rocks into the ocean, bodega head, sky. Scale, we got people, filled the frame, tried to get rid of any distractions. There's nothing there that doesn't really belong or add to the story. Okay, and include environment to tell a story or give a sense of place. Okay, we've got a nice sense of place. We've got the horizon higher up. So with this story is all about the foreground, not the sky. Balance. We've got a nice balance, I believe, and the image is there. Action, we've got implied action with Ace pointing. Suggestions, we varied the corners. Each corner is a little different. And actually the water in the lower corners lead into the photograph. In groups, we've done the odd numbers. Well, it doesn't really count here unless you count the starfish. And of course, we talked self-assignment. So you can see the photograph really covers a lot of the things that we talk about here that are good to remember when we're out in the field. Different types of photography require various camera settings and compositions. Further study is needed by the photographer in their area of interest to be successful. Some of the areas of interest might be nature, still life, sports, portrait, fashion, architectural, abstract, black and white, landscapes, travel, etc. You can see there's so many different ways that we can pursue photography. I put an example of a few things that I've done that I like. I've got a nice little path going up into the forest in the upper left, up into the aspens in the fall color. And I used a little post-processing there to get those nice colors. The second one, I love trains, and here the oiler is oiling the train, and without the action of the steam coming out, it probably wouldn't be the same picture. I like Salt Point picture. Unfortunately, the couple of trees have died since then. But if you look at the layers of the sedimentary rocks, they point towards the point. And all the trees are diagonal lines that point. The ocean, the waves point towards that point of land right out at the end. You see the Tetons, understanding and how to shoot wildlife. Waterfalls using slow shutter speed to capture the flowing water and bring out the subtle colors of the rocks around them. The arch, or like it's a nice long curve out at Point Reyes. I love that shot. I just love to see ended up there looking down at the point. And on the right, of course, we need to, the photographer wanting to do night photography. You're trying to find a nice exposure for the people and the stars. Post-processing on this brought out the stars, and then of course the people were adjusted too. And that's a lot of fun. That was one shot, one single shot. And hopefully you'll go back and review all of everything, all the items and thoughts that I've presented to you, because I think you'll benefit a lot. I've gone through those and look at those. And when we're in the field, move around, look around and see what there is. Take that first shot and see if there's maybe some lines or some shapes or some texture that you can bring in. Or in post, you might say, gee, if I made that subject a little sharper and made the rest of the image a little softer, how much it would pop out. And it works like that. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Gary, that was amazing.
That was great.
Thank you.
Wow. Many
And-
things that I don't think about, and you've reminded us of several.
Yeah, I did have two books. There was one, Design and Composition Secrets of the Professional Artist. It has 16 different artists that tell how they design, and they do everything from watercolor to oil and all that, not really a photography book. And then I had one that on composition for photographers. And so that gave me a lot, going into Google, Bing, that helped a lot too to give them. Glad you enjoyed it.
I love how you brought the artists' perspective in that have done it for so many centuries.
Yeah.
And applied it to photography. So thank you for that. That was very.
You're welcome. That was one point that I got that I hadn't really thought about before, that if you have a horizontal line like a horizon, by placing something at the end, it stops your eye. And the way the artist put it, it stops your eye from going off your picture onto someone else's picture. That was kind of cute. Yeah, so there are lots of little tips and tricks that artists use. Yeah, that I learned a lot from this too, and rereading my books and going through and trying to put it all together in something that we enjoy in an hour.
Yeah, I liked your reminder about doing self-assignments too. So many times you'll listen to a presentation or you'll learn something new, but you kind of fall into old habits.
Yeah.
You'll start taking photos. So doing the self-assignments is a great idea. It helps really give you practice and make it more second nature.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of times books that show how to be successful in photography, they always mention self-assignments. So that's really, really important. I think that's important too. It was one book that I had. I have How to Sell and Resell Your Pictures. This is something that goes back in the 80s, a book there for people who want to be commercial like that. And he always said, go beyond the standard excellent photograph. Okay, you see people on their phones all the time, got great pictures, but they're just standard ordinary, or they're standard really good pictures. So in order for us as artists, aspiring photographers, we got to be one step ahead. So that means maybe we have to go to the Grand Canyon when it's got snow, right? And that's one of the things, or using these composition techniques to give yourself just a little edge.
Yeah. For me, a lot of times it's getting my tripod out there too. I don't
Right.
be lazy.
Yeah. Hey, I'm guilty. I'm guilty as charged, because sometimes it's real easy to want to just shoot it. But what I found is I have about 400 or 500 images in stock. And they require you to have zero noise. So that means you have to use your base ISO, and they want everything sharp throughout. And so by good old F11, almost everything I shoot in way of a scenic like that, or I use at F11, and I go in and look at, I've got F11 memorized. You go out about 6 feet on F24, and that gives you, that will be sharp from there to infinity. Okay, so those are some of the little things there we kind of learned. That's the way I make all these, try to get them nice and sharp if I want them sharp throughout. And I usually use single point focus on one of those items that are near enough, but, or the closest. You know, quite often you'll have maybe a group of something. The one I always feel the one that's closest to the photographer is the most important one to have sharp. But those are guidelines. You do whatever you want. And I hope I didn't overwhelm you with the golden ratio, but they don't talk about those much in photography. But artists do them all the time.
Well, Gary, I really enjoyed you taking it beyond the rule of thirds.
Yeah. And I was really amazed too, is that hopefully those of you who have Lightroom Classic will try out going through that, because it's really kind of fun to go through there. And the one thing I was going to mention and didn't, in photography class, in the portrait class, he said, always give a little extra space on your portrait for cropping.
Mhm.
So that way, you know, if you're a little bit off, you've got room to straighten it, you know, or maybe move them off center a little bit, you know. So that's one of the little things that always stuck with me too.
So Gary, what camera are you using now?
Okay, I've got Nikon cameras, and I just bought the Nikon Z6. It's a 24 megapixel, and it really handles digital noise nice. My older camera was a D500, which was really, they considered that a professional DX camera, or the smaller sensor size. And I still use that for some of my flower stuff because I've got a lot of the older Nikon lenses.
Mhm.
And so I bought a 24 to 120. And when I did the research on it, it is very sharp all the way through. And that's what I wanted for scenics and stuff like that. If I went more megapixels, what I'll probably do is on scenics is it's really easy to stitch them together in Photoshop. And I do that with panoramas too, stitch. Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah. So now I get to save up my rubles. Well, I don't want to call them rubles anymore. For more gear, right? Aren't we all in that dilemma? What's our next piece of gear and how am I going to afford it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get either a Z, somewhere between Z6 and not the latest one, but maybe Z7.
Yeah. What I did on that is I had seen where a lot of wedding photographers were using the 6 and then the 7, but then of course the 7's 45 megapixels. So you're going to have a lot more memory like that, but it does allow you to crop. That's nice. So the 6, but what I did on that is it was on sale last fall. It's on sale now too, but the 6 is about $1,000 less than the 7. And it has a lot of the same features. There's a lot of stuff going on in that camera, but I wanted to spend a little extra money on a good lens because that's what I really wanted, was something that was sharp. I really wanted a nice sharp lens. So I spent the extra on that. One thought I had after,
what? 24 to 120?
24 to 120, and it is f4 throughout the range. You don't have the long range though, which is I miss a little bit because, you know, it'd be nice to have it out to 200, but it's really sharp up through f11, very sharp. And and one thought on that is that it's a 24 megapixel, but if you go to the 7, you've got a 45 megapixel. Okay, you have the same size sensor. So each one of your sensors in a 24 are going to be bigger, collect more light, give you less noise. And that's one of the things I really wanted, was less digital noise. So I could shoot handheld at 400 without any noise. So that saves me from having to go over to denoise and play around.
So the The 7 has more noise.
No, I think it had a little bit more. I saw one article, virtually, I mean, almost non-discernible, but it did show on this one article that I read that it had, when you, I mean, you're talking about going to like 120,000 or 20,000 ISO, right? I mean, we're not talking about 1,000 or even, you know, so he went to this really high ISO and tested the two to see the difference. And the 6 was a little bit better. Okay, so you know, it all depends. You know, do your research and
Yeah.
which either one you'll be most happy with. It's just hard to learn and redo all the buttons. I like my buttons in certain places so I can hit a button and it'll, you know, I can do different settings for wildlife, and so I can quickly go to like the one of the presets in the camera. So I have 1/2000th of a second, you know, and you know,
Wow.
continuous focus, and that's all saved. So I just flip my little dial, and I'm ready to go for wildlife, you know, for birds in flight. So that's fun. And if any of you like, I could send out I have a PDF of this presentation, and if I don't know if it'd be helpful for you or if anybody cares, I could send out that PDF to the whole club if they want it, and then you'll see what's written and actually seen.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great, thanks.
That'd be
Yeah.
super.
Because then you can go through each one of those steps and you can, you know, spend a little time going over, you know, some of the things, you know, that are presented. And then next month we got Steve. Steve's going to be a hot seat next time. How you doing, Steve?
Good job. Love
Good,
your
thank you.
some good reminders in there. I really like the talk about the golden ratio and that. That's something that I played with a long time ago and I forgot all about it. So good reminder.
Yeah, yeah,
And I really appreciated finding out where it lives in Lightroom Classic.
Yeah.
yeah. It's fun to mess around with. I didn't realize that until I had happened to be doing study for this. And that's one thing I might add is that I felt I needed to learn a little bit more. And I thought, you know, if I'm going to give a presentation, I'm going to treat it like a college class. Is just dig in and do my homework, read my books, make a you know, come down and make my guidelines that I want to bring in and expand. So I've learned a lot doing it too. So I'm right along with everybody. We're kind of all learning.
Great.
And hopefully we'll remember some of that when we get out in the field to do it.
Yeah.
Triangles.
Examples too. Your images were lovely.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you. I was looking at Trisha's triangles behind her. Notice she's
Yeah.
got triangles. So you start thinking it's a different thought process, you know.
Gary, have you entered any of your photos in an SRPS competition or of these that you showed tonight?
Oh, some were winning.
Okay, but a while ago?
Yeah, the one with the gears, the black and white.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that was our field trip, and that was best best photo of the year for me last year.
Wow.
And the ones with the birds coming down, you know, the pelicans, that was best in nature.
Nice.
So a lot of these some of them I've shown before, and some of them it's like when we went to Gettysburg. I really like that building. I saw in one of the books you gave something about the building, you know, one of the building down at Golden Gate Park, and explained these different circles, you know, the different lines. And I thought that this would be a really good one to actually see. And what I'm seeing on that, and like the one at Hearst Castle with all the tiles, I like that one, that the design that the people who designed these have gone through, and you see the nice, okay, there's your design and how they're leading you into what they want you to see, you know, or what they feel is most important.
Mhm.
Yeah, that image had a lot of really nice symmetry to it.
Yeah. And the more you look at something like that, the more you kind of see, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, architecture is wonderful for getting an idea of composition for sure.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I do that.
Yeah.
You go around a lot of the old buildings, and I grew up in a building called the Sherman Rose Adobe, and that had massive picture windows and huge redwood tree in front of it. And you could see the ocean. So there are all these layers. There was an arbor in it, and just, that's where I got totally inspired, is just seeing this really old, 1800s adobe and all of the arbors and the big windows and arched doorways, and it's it's stunning. I was blown away. And interestingly enough, the lady who was lived there was Kate Carew. Her husband, or excuse me, her son lived there, and little guy's about 4 foot tall, little guy in his 80s, and his mother was Kate Carew, was the first female landscape artist. So she was a newspaper person, and they gave me a trunk, and I looked through this. It's like they've got a Model A in the garage. They've got old clothes, and then they pull out this easel that's got all these, wooden caps on the paints all dried and cracked and falling apart. And I found a hidden step, and under that hidden step was a pipe, an old burl pipe. And I was about 14 years old. I pulled it out. I go, I'm going to use this for smoking pot in. Took the thing out, and I dug everything out, and all these seeds fall out. Well, the old lady was a stoner. So,
That's hilarious.
as an artist, so I was in her art studio there, and looking through trunks, and the trunks were full of articles with the Wright brothers, Chairman Mao. She traveled all around the world, and I was completely stunned, just because the property was mind-blowing. That's where I started my black and white photography. That's also where I lived when I met Ansel Adams. So
Oh, nice.
huge amounts of stuff happened to me just living in Monterey in this one building while my parents were having a house built. So
That sounds like a spiral.
Yeah.
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 It was
Yeah.
mind-blowing for me, but that's what started me off on getting inspired about architecture, because this was designed by an artist, and woman had a little different perspective than a lot of standard architecture. And you could walk around for hours just looking at all of this, the curve of a creek behind the house, the way the plants were put in the garden, old quince or orchard with arbors that lined up with windows, and it's stunning. It's one of these days I have to go back there and see what that place is like and do it. I can do a photo study of it, because I had some old pictures that I'd won my first competitions back in the 70s in high school. So I got to go back there. Anyway, look for old buildings and old architecture for inspiration.
That's one good point you brought out as an artist that, and I know others, I think Trish has said, if you look at some of the artists and finding that, studying their work, and you'll see how they approach design and how they approach their composition. And I think that's a good one for self-assignment, is looking up and seeing how they do that, or looking at that golden ratio. That was there's a lot to it, but it's the technical part of it. Let's just go out and take a picture, and we'll do the best we can. And then you look at the artists that are supposedly using it, and it's pretty rough. It's around somewhere, near, but so you can kind of see how famous artists use these techniques and put them into, and then ask yourself, what makes it, like the Monet that I talked about, why is it so popular? Why does everybody love it?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing so much research, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was fun too. I kept writing stuff down in Gas Mar, and I had a little tablet, and I'd be reading along, and I'd write one word down, then I'd write something else down, and trying to make it and something that was cohesive and had a rhythm to it, so you'd enjoy it.
Yeah.
And the pictures too.
job.
Thank you.
Great job, Gary. Thanks for sharing all of that.
Thank you.
See y'all. Gonna go eat dinner.
Good
You
night.
bet. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you much.
So,
I can take care of that. Sure.